without further ado, is my volume off? Yeah. Without further ado, I said that like 3 times now. Let's read some poetry. And hopefully William Blake won't be too cryptic. I know he often can be from the time I've spent reading some of his other stuff. But I think this is one of his most famous poems, maybe his most famous, The Tyger. And I haven't really ever engaged with it in earnest. So we're going to read it. And it's been a long time since I've read something not from chat, which is very different because, like, reading stuff from chat, I like get to like engage with the person and talk about the poem and ask them questions sometimes. Whereas this is just like William Blake, he's dead, he's in the ground, and I am solely responsible, along with chat's help, for figuring this out, right? So here's the Tyger. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer? What the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil? What dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? The Tyger. So it's Blake. He was from a couple hundred years ago or something. So the language on its own is, slightly difficult to just access as a modern speaker of English. But, we'll do our best to break that down as we go. We have this pretty regular rhyme scheme going on, and it has this rhythm. Right. Not only in end of line, bright night eye, but we also have thy coming in here. There's fire, thine, eyes, skies, aspire. A lot of sound going on that kind of propels us through this poem. Art, heart, heart. And there's also immediately jumping out a lot of alliteration and assonant stuff happening as well. I mean, even in the first line, Tyger, Tyger, burning bright, T, T, B, B, and then frame fearful, right? And it continues throughout distant deeps, etc., etc. And a lot of these lines kind of exist in they're separated by two, right? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright. What the hand dare seize the fire? There's these central commas that kind of, or punctuation that split things into. There is this feeling of I don't know, binariness, and I mean we use symmetry as a concept itself, right, in the poem. So maybe this makes sense. Something that's sort of symmetric. I'll read it again, though, before jumping too far into the technical. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer? What the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil? What dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? So, just from a level of like comprehending this poem, I think any poem it can be useful to ask the question of like who is in this poem? Who are our characters? Is always a valid question to ask. And of course we have sort of the tiger itself as our main I guess character throughout this poem. What the hand dare seize the fire? Question mark. Are you asking? Are you stating? Are you? If you're referring to characters, then yes, right? We have this body, the hand, the shoulder, again the hand, the feet, the hammer, and there's like a grasp somewhere, right? Grasp. We have this like body throughout that belongs to something. This like creator, right? With its hammer, with the furnace, the anvil, etc. And we also have he, right? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? I was asking the line specifically, but maybe we should progress first. Do you mean you're just asking about like what does that line mean at all, Ishmael? Because I do agree. Like we have, if that's what you're saying, we have like these lines that are kind of unintuitive in modern English, like what the hand, right? Especially this like what the or what something, what art, what the chain, what the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? These sort of whats are a bit of a stumbling point, I would say, for the interpretation of the poem. You've got Blake's Christian God there, and he's wondering if something else made the tiger. Yeah, that is what we were getting at, right? Because we have, did he who make the lamb make thee? And this is sort of, when we ask what is this he referring to, we have this down here. Did he who make the lamb? And capital lamb, for those not super knowledgeable of Christianity, this is referring to Christ, the Lamb of God. And so he who made the lamb as God the Father. Interesting. And I'm not super familiar with I know Blake has his own mythology and his own sort of reinterpretation of Christianity and the way that it works. But there's something very interesting about capitalizing lamb as to refer to Christ and not capitalizing he, which traditionally one would do in referring to like God the Father. So that's fascinating, right? And so you've got, you've got Blake's Christian God there, and he's wondering if something else made the tiger, right? Because did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? This does imply the question of, is there someone else? It's interesting that I kind of defaulted to using orange, and we have orange, black, and white as the colors happening here in the Tyger poem. So I don't know who that third character is exactly. With the Forge reference, maybe a Hephaestus type character. Yeah, Hephaestus is like a great I think you spelled it right. I think I spelled it wrong. Why they gotta have hard names? Hephaestus, right? And Hephaestus is Greek. He is the god of, literally the god of the forge, the god of creation, the one who, who stole fire from Hephaestus to bring to the people? Was that a Titan? I forget. Anyway, Hephaestus is to do with like the creation of things, and yeah, Prometheus. Yeah, so also involved there. But right, we have the hammer and anvil, and even the chain, it is Hephaestus who bound Prometheus in chains, which I did read that play by, what's his name? Starts with an A. Aeschylus, Prometheus Bound. Excellent play. So anyway, basically the story, right? You have Prometheus. He is a Titan. You have these new gods like Hephaestus. Hephaestus is the god of the forge, the fire of creation. Prometheus goes and he steals the fire from Hephaestus, and then he gives fire to man so that man can create and have ingenuity and all of that kind of stuff in return for his sin against, the gods. Zeus actually is the one who sort of punishes Prometheus, and he orders Hephaestus to bind Prometheus in chains, and like he's like in this deep chasm or something. And Hephaestus actually sympathizes with Prometheus, and it's Prometheus is sort of a like tragic hero in a sense, or it is a tragedy. That's the idea. So maybe we have some mention or some reference to this. I'm not exactly sure, just because I haven't read that much Blake, how much he references the Greek tradition. It's obviously very common in Western art to go back to the Greeks, but it certainly seems possible just based on like a cursory reading of the poem. So yeah, we have who? So we have the tiger, we have Christian God, and then we have this like this blacksmith who, right, maybe is God, maybe is not, I think is sort of what I'm picking up, because if it is God who created the tiger, then God is, the one with that hammer and furnace and anvil. If God is not, then it's something else entirely. And I think that's something William Blake wrote about a lot, was this like questioning and this grappling with God and kind of what that meant. and his spiritual condition. So maybe we can try to figure that out, right? What is this saying? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? So we have, what immortal hand or eye? This is again asking that question of who created you? How could someone create such a, sort of beautiful, fearful, powerful thing? And I think that we kind of ask that question right away in the initial stanza, which I think means it's very important to this poem, right? Asking this question of who at the start, and then again asking this question of who at the end. And this to me has the feeling of, wonder, right? What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? How could something so beautiful be created? So not only who, but like how, right? We have this feeling of wonder at like the beauty of the tiger is what it feels like we're getting at here. Craig in YouTube chat. Not often that we have YouTube chat. There was once a boy called Jocket. He went to the moon in his rocket. His rocket went bang, his balls went twang, and his dick ended up in his pocket. Beautiful, Craig. Wonderful, wonderful poetry. And welcome in. So I think the beginning of this just serves to ask that question. It is interesting to think of Europe giving the same prestige of Hellenistic pantheon to their local myths. Yeah, it is sort of fascinating that like sort of the entire Western world has this reverence for the Greeks. And that even carries over into like America. And I think a big part of that is, as I recall, the movement of the Enlightenment in this is like the late 1700s, early 1800s. And this is when Europe, started to want to have like something resembling democracy, right? Started talking about it. This is the time of like the French Revolution and, the founding of the United States of America. And the idea of like the state of Athens and the kind of importance of democracy was like definitely happening in this era. And I think that's part of when the Greek tradition was really like more interest, right? Started to happen for that. And I mean, we see it like in America, it's fascinating, right? Our government buildings have basically like Greek pillars. We have these like, white pillared, Greek resembling monuments. I mean, like the Lincoln Memorial is literally like one of these things with a bunch of pillars that is white, marble and has like Lincoln sitting in it. Right? So, and I'm pretty sure this all came from the Enlightenment. I don't have an incredible historic education, and it's probably something I ought to be reading more of because all of that context, context always gives us more understanding of a piece of art, right? Now, Renaissance is a better period for this shift. Oh yeah, because the Renaissance people were like doing lots of paintings of like Greek myth too. That is true. I guess I didn't think about that. That is a very good point, Ishmael. And then before that, in the Middle Ages, there wasn't too much art happening at all. Welcome in, Nikki. Yeah. Imagine Nietzsche constantly referencing obscure German beasts rather than going to Greeks for even the lamest of analogies. That would be funny. Yeah, I think it's a testament to like how good Greek art and like those myths were, because they are like genuinely incredible. Well-educated people studied the classics, considered it part of their lineage, but I think it was probably still shocking to suggest anything but the Christian God actually existed. Yeah, at the time for Blake, right, the Christian God was still very dominant, and to, you know, this poem like potentially calls into question God, right? Is it God? Right, this poem asks. Is it something else? And I think, that's a very important context to this poem. Like, can that feeling of like the sublime, of looking at something beautiful and natural and symmetrical and terrifying and natural, come from somewhere other than the divine? Even that implication is a pretty big one to suggest. So those things are all, right, important context to this poem. William Blake, The Poison Tree, is one of my favorite poems. I've not read very much William Blake. I've not read The Poison Tree, but I'm reading William Blake now to change that. Christianity drew back a lot of pagan stuff, but imagine they venerated their historical pagan religions at least as much as Greek paganism. Yeah, that yeah, it's an interesting thought, and it's always a fascinating and also sad kind of phenomenon of how certain cultural traditions and movements of art are forgotten or made to be forgotten, and sort of the decision of what gets to persist and what doesn't. That's always a conversation that is sort of laced in the discussion of classic poetry or classic art, that can't really be ignored, right? Because yes, these are great pieces of art. Blake is, in fact, a great poet. The Greek poets and tragedians and comics, great artists. And these things they've persisted, but only by partially chance and by the fact that they've been like allowed by those in power to persist as artistic traditions. And, people talk about the old dead white guy. And, usually this is as like a dismissal of classic art. I think that's a problem because, like, no matter what, it's a testament to a piece of art to persist even 100 years. And this is a bit, dismissive. However, that also references the fact that, any people essentially of color, any women, you know, any, I mean, that's basically it, right? Any minority, queer people, right? All of these things. I mean, this is like intersectionality, right? Um, these people had less of an opportunity to create art. They certainly had less of an opportunity to be remembered. And so the classics are partially what, the ruling classes of history have allowed to persist, right? And that's always important. And that's something I will certainly um, try to navigate well as we, weekly stream about classics, to bring in, classics of the Harlem Renaissance in America, or classics from, let's say, like, you know, Japanese writing, tanka and haiku, um, South American, Central American poetry, or I guess more broadly, American poetry that isn't just the United States, the Nerudas and, uh, those sorts of authors. Um, I mean, maybe Ishmael will be able to continue providing Middle Eastern classic poetry. That's important, right? It's definitely part of the discussion. We're seeing resurgence of interest in Norse, Celtic, and Slavic culture lately, in America at least. Yeah, and I think part of that is probably right. A lot of America has descendants to like Northern Europe, a lot of Irish people, a lot of Eastern European descent, a lot of Northern European. I mean, and I think I've noticed this where like, I mean, like, most Americans, uh, like your average, white American will say, doesn't have a cultural tradition to necessarily draw from in the way that, you know, other cultures have traditions, because I guess white people are just like the colonizing destroyer of culture. Um, but like, and I imagine there's probably some degree of like people craving heritage, especially in a modern world that's like isolated with technology and not feeling you have any like roots. Um, of course, there is American mythology and there is American culture, and it's the Native American cultures that have been like, you know, wiped out, all but wiped out. Of course, there's still lots of uh, Native American people who are still being oppressed, but uh, yeah, those are right. Those are some of the traditions that uh, lost and disillusioned Americans might try to draw from to feel like they have some connection to the world and not be alone and miserable. That's sort of how I interpret those shifts. Um, it also makes sense maybe as like Americans who will fetishize other cultures, like the weeaboo kind of thing, where one wants to have a culture to attach to because America lacks distinct culture and is just such a young uh, nation, right? That we don't have like a mythos. Like the American mythos is like maybe like cowboys and like westward expansion, which is so laced with like problems. Stanley single-handedly bringing Norse to life is insane. Celtic myths are based, though. They are based, yeah. Slavic is just the Witcher law. I mean, probably more than that, right? I'm not, I don't know. And it's probably a bit of a generalization to say blank culture is blank media franchise no matter what. Uh, and I'm also not familiar with The Witcher. Let's keep going into this poem because we haven't gotten so far past stanza one. Although I think we've come to a lot of relevant context that I think will help us uh, dig into this poem. Okay, you did send another message. It is what you identify with. If you don't identify with Anglo-Saxons before the 1500s and neither with any American native heritage, of course, white American is not enough to create a pantheon. Yeah, and I think having cultural roots is something that like grounds people and helps them. Um, so that's probably where like the reaching is happening. Anyway, in what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? We'll go to the start. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? So, now that we've talked a little bit about Greek stuff, we have this interesting line of like, what the hand dare seize the fire. which is deeply mm, reminiscent. It sounds very Promethean, right? The hand that sees the fire. And I guess it's maybe important to ask, like, fundamentally what that symbolizes, Prometheus, uh, as a story. Like, what does that actually mean to, steal fire from the gods for man, right? This is a sort of like heretical action, right? To go against the gods. I mean, hubris is probably more the word that would be used in like the Greek tradition, to act directly against gods or to like spit in the face of fate. And this is very interesting, right? When we've already discussed Blake sort of calling into question God, because this has a similar feeling to, man being given fire from the gods, Prometheus taking from the gods. It's reminiscent symbolically, I think. I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts on that. Byron has a good poem about Prometheus, by the way, if any of you like the image. I haven't read Byron's Prometheus poem. I think I've heard of it, and I have a big book of Byron, but maybe that can be something for a future stream of our classic poems. Byron's Prometheus. Is the title just Prometheus? I don't recall, but that might be good. I like recommendations for these. Even then, old enough to bring forth Mormonism, so that is a thing. Yeah, America is a little bit old, right? We're going on, what, 250 years? It's at least long enough to birth a religion, apparently. So in what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? On what the hand dare seize the fire? So we have what's starting to become a pattern in these lines, along with the second line in the first stanza. And this is the idea of like some darkness, right? Burning bright in the forests of the night. And then in what distant deeps burnt the fire of thine eyes. Yeah, page 394, if you also got the Penguin Classic collection. I'm not sure which Byron collection I have, but I'm sure it's in there. So yeah, we have this idea of like something burning within darkness, this light against dark kind of feeling, and that, feels somewhat connected to these ideas of like symmetry and man and God. Maybe not too much specific to say on those yet, though, in terms of what that's saying. In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? So this is our first actual introduction in the poem to he. And I think it's like probably very important to try to suss out what this is saying about he and which he this is talking about. I'm pretty sure that he is never referring to the Tyger, because Tyger is always thy and thine, right? Thine eyes, thy fearful symmetry, thy heart, right? And that's presented as something different, I think, than he. And if this is to be God, as the Christian God. Or maybe it is like the entity in question that creates things, be it God or something else. Could be a demon or a rogue creator. Yeah. Um, Either way, right, we have like the creator of some kind. I think that's probably on the right track, Pepper. On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And this kind of goes straight into the next part, so maybe beneficial to keep reading a little bit. And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when that heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? So we're sort of describing the pieces of the body, right, of this creator. Feet, hand, shoulder, hand again, and then the heart of the tiger. The wings might also allude to Bellerophon, who wanted to fly to Olympus on Pegasus too, but got struck down. Of course, also Icarus. Yeah, we've already kind of established this feeling of hubris. So we have Icarus, who, of course, flew too close to the sun, and then Bellerophon, which I'm not actually familiar with, but he wanted to fly to Olympus too, but got struck down. So this is again, giving the implication of hubris, of like testing the gods, trying to go beyond the gods, or trying as man to be as great as the gods. And I think this is probably where, I'm starting to realize the importance of a lowercase h, he, because that is, less certain than that we're talking about the Christian God, and we're talking about some other creator, like you said, Pepper, some rogue creator that is trying to do something sort of above its station. On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? So literally in this couplet, we create like all of these images of hubris, just the hand in the fire and on the wings, right? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And what shoulder and what art? This is interesting, right? The reference to art. And, I wonder maybe as like a cursory idea whether this could be like some amount of self-reference. Because in art, in this poem, The Tyger, William Blake is attempting to, recreate something, the image of this, beast or whatever. And in that sense, maybe a thought is that this creator could be Blake himself, trying to create something he cannot create, and to paint a proper image of like the majesty of the world. And then it's about, the hubris of creation itself, or the hubris of striving, or just the human action of trying to capture beauty. Maybe that fits later with He Who Made the Lamb, right? If we truly want to interpret this as something of like questioning God, because there's the sentiment that God is simply something created by man, right? God is something that comes from the mind, and like the power of God is only like ascribed to him through, you know, that sort of human desire to consider the ideal, the perfect. And, you know, in which case he could be the artist or just man himself. I'm not sure about that. It's a thought. It maybe makes sense with what I know about Blake, having read a very little bit of him and his sort of questioning of belief. It's a thought, right? And we are talking about hands and shoulders and feet, which are just like the body parts of man, right? Like why would he use this imagery of a human body to describe this he? And maybe it is then to show us or to guide us toward the idea of man himself, like sort of against the ideal, against something sublime and terrifying. And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And I think this, right, to twist the sinews of thy heart, you know, it could be describing like the act of creation itself, to sort of like, you know, twist these things as to like create them, right? To like twist a story or whatever. I think that can be used. It kind of feels like to literally take the action of like taking this matter and twisting it into something that is, to sort of give it substance, maybe. And when thy heart began to beat. So then this is like the actual creation of life, right? We're twisting the sinews, bringing them into being, and then there's that moment when life actually starts to occur. What dread hand and what dread feet? So now we bring in dread. And I don't know if there's the idea of like now being terrified of what oneself has created. You know, the hand that has created the tiger now has dread. I mean, what dread hand is a very vague kind of question. Um, what dread hand, right? Like I'm not even quite sure how to literally interpret the language there. But it could be speaking to like the fear of what one has created. Which then, you know, if we're talking about like the fear of God, if man, it's like man giving power to God. Man is afraid of God because man has created something so powerful as God, maybe. Christians have a lot of hubris to think that there is one perfect creator who created everything perfectly, and then say some things in God's creation aren't as good as others. Yeah, I think the modern Christian practice and doctrine is certainly full of a lot of difficult to reconcile contradictions, and I think, right, Pepper, is it Pepper because it's PPR? Maybe it is. I like that. Right, Christianity has like the catch-all out of saying like sin, right? Like oh well, like someone's acting badly even though they're a Christian, well, like sin, the work of the devil, those kinds of things. Christ called out bad things too, I suppose. Yeah, like evil definitely exists within Christianity, because like sin still exists and the devil still exists, and like Revelation is the point when like everything comes back, or the second coming and judgment and all of that, right? Like Christianity does live in a sinful world, um, according to Christianity. I think there are also, but there are like pretty strong inconsistencies over like what is described as sinful and uh, who can be forgiven and how that uh, maybe disagrees with like textual interpretations of Christ and forgiveness, particularly like Protestants who make themselves out to be very forgiving. I think we shouldn't discard the option that this is just Marcionist propaganda. I don't know what that means, Ishmael. What Marcionism uh, was an early dualistic belief system originating with the teachings of Marcion of Sinope in Rome around 144. Marcion was an early Christian theologian evangelist, an important figure in early Christianity. I'm going to need probably a lot more context, Ishmael, on what it would mean that this is Marcionist propaganda and why you think that. I don't know when this was written, but I'm personally hoping the answer to what is Xenu. Y'all just like name dropping things that I don't know. Oh, Xenu is in Scientology. Unfortunately, Blake is long before Scientology. Maybe fortunately, I don't know. But Blake, let's see. I don't know when the Tyger was written. Um, I don't know if it would even tell me in this book. Is the Tyger in this book? It must be, right? Songs of Experience 110. Does it say a date? No. Cool. Can someone look that up? I think this was written in like 18 something or late 17 something. I'm pretty sure William Blake. I can actually look it up. Da 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 da. I hate that AI is trying to give me analysis. 1794. Yeah, late 1700s. I'm pretty good. Okay, so Marcionist is Old Testament God does not equal New Testament God. Okay, so it's like a Christian, sort of like a mysticism, like an early thing, because like the mystics kind of pulled up later. This sentiment is seen as anti-Semitist nowadays, though. It is mostly about the dualism part. Well, I mean, I feel like it's interesting that one would like take that as anti. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the full context. How that relates. I don't know. Yeah, so it's the change that like the Old Testament God is something cruel and like punishing is different than the New Testament God. And now how do you think that relates to this poem? I mean, of course we have like he who made the lamb and we have this like God stuff. But how do you find this immediately relating to the poem? Gnostic true God and Yalda Bouth. Y'all are doing a really great job of like putting funny words in my chat today that I don't know. So I presume the Gnostic true God would be like the good God, the Christ-like God, and then Yaldabaoth would be like the Old Testament punishing God. I'm guessing is where that's going. Don't give me an AI overview. Oh wait, is a malevolent god and demiurge according to various Gnostic sects. represented sometimes as theriomorphic lion-headed serpent. He's a false god. Ah, interesting. uh, the weird Christian mythology is really fun. Like the out there stuff is really fascinating, and I know Blake like involved himself in this stuff and created his own mythology. And like I was reading something by him the other day, uh, the the Proverbs of Hell, and he's like talking about conversations with angels and stuff like that. So I know that Blake like exists within this space of like alternate Christian thought. But yeah, good God and bad God. That makes sense. And I wonder if like in this poem we should be thinking about the tiger as some sort of, you know, religious relating symbol, and like what the tiger actually is. Because we do have like a literal tiger, I think. Um, and like, but this is maybe something to keep in mind. Not just the question of God, but the thought of like what the tiger might be symbolizing in this poem as well. Gnostic Christians believed Yaldabaoth broke away from the true God and created the world. Ah, interesting. So that's like the creator. Okay, that's super cool and fascinating. I think it's probably all a bit much for me to like genuinely comprehend. But yeah, we might have, right, this entity of creation that's sort of in hubris, acting outside of the work of, you know, the true God, right? That's certainly something we could think about different faces of God, so to speak, in this poem, or parts of God. Let's keep reading though. What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp, dare its deadly terrors clasp? What the anvil, what the hammer, what the chain, what the furnace, in what furnace was thy brain? So, we have the right, in what furnace was thy brain? Uh and I think this, the furnace is again describing fire, right? Fire in the same like Hephaestus kind of way. And again, we're talking about the grasp and the clasping here. Uh oh, but thy is the tiger, right? This is the tiger. In what furnace was thy brain? So that is to say, like, what furnace, what process of creation again created the tiger? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain, the tiger's? Again, just asking how it was created. What the anvil, what dread grasp, dare its deadly terrors clasp? What the anvil, what dread grasp, dare its deadly terrors clasp? So it's, and can maybe be referring to other things, right? We can refer to its as the brain. What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? So then that's just again, what thing created that brain? What forge, what conditions created something so powerful and deadly and terrifying? I think that's probably just like reasonable textual interpretation, right? Tiger, wild, powerful, could kill and eat men, beautiful but dangerous. Cats were declared evil in the Middle Ages and also associated with and vilified with women. But how could God make anything evil. Yeah, how could God create something so terrifying? Or how could, you know, what is the thing? Maybe, not how could God. What is the thing that created something so terrifying? If God, right, how does that make sense as God who also created the lamb? I think the lamb is great here, right? Because the lamb is a great contrast to the tiger, where the lamb is the gentle, forgiving, saving thing. How could a god of the lamb be the god of the tiger? Is the question being asked. And then it's, well, maybe it isn't the god of the lamb, is an interpretation. Maybe it's some separate or partial god, or some Gnostic broken off Yaldabaoth god, right? Those are options. uh, Either way, right? The narrator is feeling immense awe at like the beauty and the power of this thing. And I think like there's something very important here to be said about symmetry. Der frame thy fearful symmetry, with this idea of the lamb as the thing symmetric to the tiger. Um, this question is, partially maybe like why is there fear and hope? Why is there gentleness alongside with terror? And like it's a big question to ask of a creator of reality. It's not terrifying to the tiger. Well, yeah. Either something else made the tiger, or maybe humans shouldn't be so judgy about God's creation. Okay, yeah. So we have like, man shouldn't judge God, which maybe fits in with the idea of like Hephaestus and stuff. We have like, something else made the tiger. We have maybe just the poem as like a meditation on like fear and awe, with maybe the idea of like belief in God springing out from witnessing the powerful and terrifying. This also with maybe like the idea of like ideal things, symmetry. Like just the question of opposites. I think in Proverbs of Hell, Blake used the words. I'll read something from Blake. Where's Proverbs of Hell? I read this the other day. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend Proverbs of Hell. I think it would be an interesting writing exercise to write proverbs and try to write things that feel like true and wise, that are like simple and small. Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Sorry, not Proverbs of Hell. And like Blake likes this idea of like opposites and their connection. He writes about contraries. Without contraries, there is no progression, is the line in that work. So these things that are like opposing and different, this sort of, I guess, like dialectic idea, the powerful and fearful against the gentle, right? These are all important things. Maybe I should do this more often in poems, is keep a list of the important stuff. If the Christian God made the tiger, the women, the snakes, the many races, and everything, is this early DEI? Yeah. As man shouldn't judge God, right? The inclusion of all things. That's That's something we could it might be a little forced. Um but I think it's very funny. If I am literally a part of your art, maybe I can be a critic of it. Yeah. And like we have the idea, like we bring in like what art could twist the sinews of thy heart. And I referenced, or I mentioned, the self-referential um as like what is one's own place in this. Um and like sort of like man as the thing that creates, but I do like that phrase, Ishmael. Okay. These are some ideas. This poem is very uh, dense, right? There's a lot going on here. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Uh so this is speaking to like creation, right? His work, and like making stuff. Uh and we have like this stars and water thing, which like at the start of Genesis, what like God makes the stars, and then God makes water, and then God makes land, and then God makes animals. So that could be what this is referring to, maybe. Um, I mean, a star throwing down their spear. This is also maybe just like feeling of literal imagery of like a shooting star. Um, but I'm not exactly sure what that is to say. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears. I think it's just a pretty way to refer to the creation of the world. Like I think this is like Genesis 1 is what I'm thinking. Um right, like this sort of creation of light and water and the heavens. Probably. Tears is interesting though. It almost gives like a sorrowful feel to that act. And it asks, right? It doesn't say that he was happy to see his creation. It asks, did he smile his work to see? Was this act of creation good? And, I think the Bible says, like, and it was good or whatever. But, like, did he, was he pleased with the act of creation? I think like another interpretation of this could just be as like sort of an incomprehensible appreciation for God's creation, where it's not questioning God, but it's like, wow, God's creation is so beautiful. God's creation is so majestic and dangerous and strong that it it is the same as the experience of connection with God itself, right? And then um you know I don't actually know how that relates to this line. um did he smile his work to see? um But I actually think this could just be like awe and sublime. Like there could actually be a lack of questioning God, and it's like, or that like to say that creation is so beautiful as a reflection of God that it makes one sort of question the idea of a distant God, maybe. Stars don't like tigers, apparently. I read the stars as being Team Lamb. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears. I'm not sure. Hmm. Possibly a reference to fallen angels, that too. In which case, we're talking about sin, right? Fallen angels. In that case, maybe we have the idea of the tiger as something that rivals the divine, right? Tiger is burning bright, right, in the forests of the night. Um, and we could almost have the tiger as a sort of fallen angel, as something reflective of God's power, but maybe seemingly up to interpretation incompatible with God's power, with its fear against the lamb. Not sure. I mean, the stars being Team Lamb kind of makes sense, like vibes on a vibes level, Ishmael, right? Because like you know, the stars are like from heaven. They're throwing spears, arguably a sort of like judging thing. And right, like the lamb is a heavenly thing. So well, I'm not sure. Watered heaven with their tears is like beautiful and vague and evocative. um, but then we have Tiger, Tiger burning bright in the forests of the night. What a mortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful. Oh, guys, it changes. This is why we pay attention and be attentive. What a mortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? What a mortal hand or eye dare frame your fearful symmetry? Um, is a very fascinating change. I mean, what a mortal hand or eye dare do this thing? How dare a god create that, right? Maybe brings in again more of that idea of questioning. Why would God dare do this thing? How could God create something so fearfully beautiful? When Lucifer and his buddies were thrown out of heaven for rebelling against God, it was thought to be literally like falling stars. Yeah, and I mean, I actually maybe quite like the tiger as a falling star, as something burning bright in the night. Um, right, fire, the fire um, of thine eyes. Maybe. uh, some piece of divinity falling from like the divine anvil and forge above to like grace earth with its terrifying presence or something. Very possible. So maybe I'll add that down here to another maybe reasonable interpretation of this. And these aren't all distinct from each other, right? A lot of these are very much combined or can be combined. Um, but yeah, these are all things that like the poem could be suggesting, which this one has a lot. It's like very impressive in its sort of symbolic interpretability, um, for such like a small poem, right? I guess I see why people like William Blake. We're gonna take a brief William break now. um, so to rest the mind and to move the body, please stand up and move for a few minutes. Get a snack or something. Stop looking at a screen. Thinking about poetry is very mentally tiring, and I'd encourage y'all to decompress, and then we'll come back and keep talking about it because it does feel like there's still more to talk about, right? In this symbolism, and we haven't talked even that much about the text and craft and the creation of the poem. So yeah, we'll be right back in just like 3 minutes. Yeah. Hello. Welcome back. We're still reading poetry. Still alive. Back from the break. I hope you all did, in fact, move yourselves and rest the mind for a moment. It's always very helpful to step away from something and return to it, especially if that stepping away is literal. I find it quite nice. But I think there's not much reason to delay, and we will catapult straight back into the rather difficult words. I think they're pretty difficult. Of William Blake. And we're going to read the whole thing again. Because the best part of stepping away from a poem is getting to zoom back out and come back and read the whole poem as a single piece, right? The Tyger. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? So, I do want to step back from like the textual, like meaning, symbols, metaphors, that kind of stuff going on in this poem. It's mostly use of symbol, and that symbol being to take a concrete thing, like a tiger or an anvil or fire or a star, and have that represent something abstract or emotional or a concept. And that's all great. That's like often one of the harder things to do in poetry is to like understand symbols, understand metaphors, understand the text. But I also want to talk about the construction of this poem itself, because I think it's interesting. And part of that is definitely like we have this verse and we have this very clear rhythm to the poem, right? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry. In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? So what's happening really is we have 8 syllables to a line, at least. Yeah, we have 8. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright. Actually, that's 7. In the forests, 1, 2, 3, 4, of the night. So we have 7 syllables in lines, and then at the end, I think we go to 8. Right? What immortal hand or eye, that's 7, could frame thy fearful symmetry. Could frame thy fearful symmetry. We have 8. And also, I mean, you can hear it when I read. These lines feel pretty strongly divided into like 2 parts. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright, and we even have like a comma sometimes to show that. In the forests of the night. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. What immortal hand or eye? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Right? This is like the motion, the sort of sway that we have to this poem, and it does feel like that. It sort of sways back and forth. To me, it almost gives like the feeling of chanting, especially this like Tyger, Tyger, burning bright. The alliteration of these things, the repeated sounds, the sort of landing at the end of the line, it gives it this not song-like, but chant-like, where it has like repetition and pause and repetition and pause. I think this contributes to the idea of the poem, right? We've already talked about like paganism in this poem and in our like analysis here, and I think a big part of that, right, is the idea of like an animal and like maybe even like the worship of the power of the natural. And I would say like chanting is often associated with that. And if nothing else, chanting is associated with the religious in general, where like many religions have chanting, whether it's, Eastern like meditation with like the chanting of mantras. We have like the Christian chanting and like monks and that kind of stuff, and Gregorian. There's all sorts of chanting involved in like ritual and religion. The chanting of the Quran, right? Very common. So, and I think it gives this feeling. It also has like a push and a pull. It manages to stay like smooth, and I don't know, it does kind of feel like it's like slinking about. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? It's like this sort of shifting, chanting, sort of spiritual motion. And then the interesting thing is the final line in the stanza, could frame thy fearful symmetry. This line goes straight through. It doesn't have any like central pause necessarily. And it keeps this motion all the way through and just stops at the end. It also breaks the rhyme scheme where it really like punctuates. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? So what we have here is the description of the tiger itself as something magical, something terrifying, just in even the way the words are spoken. And then in line 4, could frame thy fearful symmetry. It's taking this magical kind of thing and like putting it into form, into life, framing it, kind of pinning it down, taking something like fascinating and then like, or something divine, something supernatural, and making it real. And that final line really grounds us in reality. Could frame thy fearful symmetry. It's like this is the moment where we see it. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what a mortal hand or eye. You know, it's burning, but it's in the forest, it's in darkness, it feels kind of distant, right? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? All this kind of the same vague stuff. What the hand dare seize the fire? And this is different. This stanza actually acts differently than this one. So because this is still a 7-syllable stanza, but it switches from 4-3, in what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes, on what wings. Okay, there's actually like a bunch of shifting happening here. That's another conversation. Also, wasn't he a contemporary of Darwin? Perhaps the creator was the new god of science. Yeah, Darwin was also right in that Enlightenment time. And we have the idea of like evolution, right? Darwin was, yeah, Darwin was dead before this poem was written. So his ideas would have been like known. Wait, no, I have that wrong. I have that very wrong. Darwin was later than Blake. This poem was written at the end of the 1700s. Darwin was born in 1809. So we don't have the theory of evolution yet. Yeah. So there is no contemporary god of science at the time of the writing of this poem. I really like the idea, right? Because, you know, we have like the natural, and if we had the theory of evolution, it would suggest that something so terrifying, so powerful is created naturally without the hand of God. And that would be a really interesting way to frame this poem. I think it's like a really cool interpretation of this poem in a modern sense of our interpretations of sort of these powerful magical things, the world around us, you know, God's creation without the presence of God. But it wouldn't have been in the mind of Blake as this was written. So, yeah. I think the scientist of the time, like, yeah, no, no Darwin. Yeah, I like the idea though. So carrying on with like some of this cool sound stuff. In what distant deeps or skies? So we have like 4-3 again. Burnt the fire. Burnt the fire. I think it's a 2-syllable fire. Um, of thine eyes. It makes more sense that way. On what wings dare he aspire? So we go 4-3, 4-3, and then we have a shift. On what wings, 3 syllables, dare he aspire? 4 syllables, and then what the hand dare seize the fire? Interesting that we have like fire being different. We have like fire here to like match the scheme, and then we have like dare seize the fire as like a 1 syllable. It's cool how words can act like that. But we shift from like the 4-3 chanting Tyger feel, in what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes, to on what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? So we have like a more weight on the second one, and these lines really like push into the question, and they feel much more grounded and like they slow down because you like really land on this question mark. And I think it's interesting because it creates like a very subtle but strong difference of characterization of like the questioning of man against the uh, magic of the tiger. And these things are inverted, right? This desire to pin it down against like the fluid motion of the thing itself. And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? This is different. This one goes 5-3. Could twist the sinews of thy heart. And when thy heart began to beat, 8-8, what dread hand and what dread feet? 7. So we are playing around quite a bit. Like there is a verse to this poem, and there is a sort of structure of sound going on with the syllables, but it is like changing throughout every stanza. And I think it is doing a good job of communicating different feelings of tone. Because like, and what shoulder and what art, this is doing the same like 4-3 mysteriousness. And even though this is being ascribed to the creator, it brings that same feeling as like the mysticism of the tiger. In this case though, it's just that like the creator feels kind of unknown and ephemeral. Could twist the sinews of thy heart. We're talking about something literal, and we have this very symmetric like 8 beat. And when thy heart began to beat, again, it's just very like grounded. It calls more attention to this line. What dread hand and what dread feet? And after this, right, like 3 and a pause with a question feels very like stunted. It feels very surprised. You know, right? What dread hand and what dread feet? Like, it really gives a lot of suspense to keep going into the next question. What the hammer? What the chain? 4-3. In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil? What dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? This one's all 7, and it's all, you know, following that sort of 4-3 chanting mystical question, used to question God in the same way that like, or used to question the creator in the same way that like the tiger just is. It's as if like the nature of the tiger itself, the motion of the tiger as the verse, as the presentation of the syllables, calls into question itself the idea of a creator. Like that's pretty cool. When the stars threw down their spears, 3-4, this very like statement feeling, and watered heaven with their tears, and watered heaven with their tears, flips it, more evocative. Did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? And like this line hits so hard. Did he who made the lamb make thee? It's another one of those like 8-syllable lines, and these feel the most grounded. They feel the most stable of anything in the poem. And when we have them, you know, it really highlights these, and they stick out from the rest of the work. Did he who made the lamb make thee? And this really does feel like maybe the most central question of the whole poem, especially with how it's written like that. And then like, could frame thy fearful symmetry, is also important, right? Because we're talking about the beauty of the tiger. What the hand, what dread hand, and what, there's another 8 in here somewhere, but, oh, these ones. Yeah, and these are also like the creation of it. So we have the beauty, the creation, and like the question of the creator are these like big things. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? And, it goes from like questioning to like more like fear and doubt. Okay, not Darwin yet, but definitely considering the possibility of nature could occur without a divine hand. Yeah. I'm liking Muda Sumito's mention of Daedalus more and more, and Prometheus humanism. Yeah, I think like the Icarus Daedalus is the other guy in Icarus, right? Um oh, he's the guy who made the stuff. Oh, so he's very similar to Prometheus. Well, I mean, I mean Icarus. Duh. Time for my nap. I mean, there's something interesting about Daedalus though, because Daedalus is the one who created Icarus's wings, and Icarus failed by like taking those and going against his advice and flying too high. Um, and then Prometheus is like the one who took the tool um, and gave it to man, which actually makes maybe Prometheus like more similar in some ways as a character to Daedalus. Uh, but yeah, the idea of this poem like hinting at its own hubris is like a very strong notion. That I think is cool. Yeah, it wasn't actually Ishmael who mentioned Icarus. It was Radiation King who came in earlier. Uh, we'll give credit where credit is due. But yeah, I like how the writing of this poem highlights the big important questions, right? These two dare frame thy fearful symmetry, or could frame thy fearful symmetry, right? And then it also really brings us to, did he who made the lamb make thee? And then also, right, some of this stuff in the middle of that actual creation. That's very effective, and it's kind of symmetrical in a way. Thank you for the follow. Um, yeah, I think we're still left with the question, of course what this poem is getting at, and we can never have like a objective answer. We can only do our best and like scribble more and try to break it down. But I think I'm most inclined to like look at it through these fundamental lines that we land on. Did he who made the lamb make thee? Dare frame thy fearful symmetry. What art could twist the sinews of thy heart, and when thy heart began to beat, and then this could frame thy fearful symmetry, right? And I think could frame thy fearful symmetry really speaks to wonder. What immortal hand or eye could even do this? How could something so beautiful be created at all? Right? That there's just a human wonder looking at the world around us, and that like fundamental appreciation. Um, and then, and what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart, and when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? This speaks to fear, right, alongside wonder, which maybe these two together give us some feeling of the sublime in relation to the tiger, being overwhelmed by what is. Um, and I think also just the fear in creation itself. And, maybe this is where we come to the idea of man. Uh, and like the slight self-reference of the poet recreating the tiger and recreating wonder, but also, you know, maybe beauty and or wonder and fear, beauty and fear being very strongly linked to each other. Death and threat, being connected to like the ideal and God, which it always kind of is. This question again, did he who make the lamb make thee? This discussion of opposites, or as Blake uses, contraries, right? How can these two different things, the lamb and the tiger, exist in the same world, and how could those two things be created by a God? How could fear and wonder, how could beauty and pain like coexist? Like, feels like a very central question. What immortal hand or I dare frame thy fearful symmetry? And I think it asks God directly. Like, it appeals to God or whatever. Like, it doesn't even have to question God, but it asks, like, why? Like, why do we exist in this world of these opposites, of brutality, of terrifying symmetry? And that use, right, in the tiger, fearful symmetry, I will say. Terrifying symmetry is fine. Like, it maybe almost feels like Blake asking, like, why do I live in this world? How dare I be put into this place? How dare God create things so terrifying, things so magical and powerful, or not God at all, or whatever all this came from, right? And maybe how dare man, right, sort of construct gods and dualities, maybe. That's sort of like the motion that I get from this poem. Like, if anything is my interpretation, it's kind of this part here. And I think a lot of all of this exists within that, right? The question of whether man can judge God, this fundamental thing within the poem of the ability to question God and the ability to like grapple with reality and terrifying things. The question of what made the tiger is there. I don't actually think it's like the central question of the poem. This is more what I like. Fear, awe, gentleness, power, how they relate to each other. This stuff. Some of this, like how man relates to all of this. I like the observation of fallen angels. But yeah. Wonder. Wonder, the sublime, fear, duality. I guess these are the things that I really, really think about in this poem. Tigers are just rad, yo. Also, tigers are cool. Yeah, I mean, maybe the whole poem is just tigers are cool. I really like Tiger with a Y. I feel like I just want to, like, if I ever mention tigers in my life, I want it to consciously be tigers with a Y rather than tigers with an I. I think this is a much more visually appealing way to refer to a tiger, right? Look at all this drawing today. We kind of did a lot here. I guess this is a very like long analysis. Like 2 hours on a poem. Almost hour 45 maybe so far. Can we do T.S. Eliot next time? He writes a lot of long poetry is the difficult thing. Like, I would love to read like Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock on stream. It's just a very long poem. Why did he say tiger but not fire? Fire, Fyer. Um, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it should be uh Tiger. Sorry, did it wrong. I failed. Tiger, Tiger. It's Wait, that's something I just noticed. Burning bright. Like, why don't we have bright with a Y? Why aren't all of the I's actually replaced? In the forest of the night. Shouldn't this be night? I think William Blake failed. He should be doing all Y's. This is a crazy. This looks like a different language, actually, just to go from like night to night. Like this YGHT thing is actually like messing with my head in how sort of unusual that feels in language. I really like this. um Crazy thing that I did not really notice until now, and maybe it's because I've written over things too much. Tiger gets a capital T. Um and of course not just in the start of the line, but Tiger is repeated and very clearly has a capital T in the second one. A capital T in the way that he does not, right? This poem has he lowercase, it has tiger uppercase, and it has lamb uppercase, right? Um, and I think that is to communicate that like this lamb thing is one of the most important things going on. This symbolic connection of like capital T tiger against capital L lamb, maybe the sort of symbol of innocence and purity and gentleness against the essence of power and strength and this sort of like lithe, terrifying, dominating creature. uh, which does bring us back to that idea of contrary ideas, duality, symmetry. Very important to this poem. This poem is also very nicely symmetric. I do think it's effective that we have, you know, 6 stanzas of 4s. That's just very nice and divisible and symmetric with these like divided into lines. Feels very even. I don't know if I have anything more to say about this. um, and I've said a lot, so it's not that I'm like yearning for more things to say, because I think we've given it quite a good go. Um, I mean, I have to say that I really love this poem. I think my favorite line is, "Did he who made the lamb make thee?" That's pretty. Like, that feels like really the most hard hitting important line in the poem, right? Uh, but yeah, I guess I'll read it again if we're done. If there are no other questions. That was fun. Thanks. Yeah, Pepper. I find it really fun too. And I do it 3 times a week, live on the internet, talking about poetry. Uh, it's it's very fun if you're nerdy enough, I guess. um, but yeah, here's a final reading of The Tyger by William Blake. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer? What the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil? What dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what a mortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? The Tyger. That's a great poem. That's a great poem. That's really good. Hot take. William Blake was a good poet, right? Um, wow. No, that's, I mean, oh, understandable why it has endured for 230 years, right? Um, yeah. Blake is dope.